Hi, and welcome to Crafts with Ash. My name's Ashley, and today I'm going to bring you 4 really great Mother's Day DIY gift ideas. So if you're looking for the perfect gift to give your mother-in-law or your mom or your grandma or a special aunt or a special friend, these are for you. But first, if you would be so kind, don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel, then hit that little notification bell. That way you can get notified anytime I upload a new video. I have a lot of content coming up, and I know you would not want to miss a thing. Then visit me over on Instagram and Facebook and join my crafting community. All right, let's jump right into these Mother's Day gift ideas. So for the first one, I'm going to start off with this little cutting board decor. Now, it's not a real cutting board, but I picked a bunch of these up around, when they first came out, because I just knew that you could make some really great things. So I went ahead and cut off the tag, and then I used my little scraper to pop off each of those little tacks. Now, they were just pushed in there, so I just kind of used a little muscle and grabbed them, or plucked them off. Then I took my sanding block and I sanded the paper down just a little bit. Now, I did start tearing off the paper, and then I realized, wait, I'm going to be Mod Podging something over it, so I didn't really need to do that. So next, I took this beautiful piece of scrapbook paper and I just kind of put it down on the center and used my fingernail to make a fold so I knew where to cut it. And then I went ahead and cut it off so that it would fit in that center square. Next, by using Mod Podge, I went ahead and decoupaged it down. Now, you're going to see a variety of different colors and styles in this video. I mainly just wanted to use what I had. I wasn't really making any of these with anybody in mind. I, of course, have a mom and a mother-in-law, but I was not making these for them just yet. I was just making these to give ideas to all of you. So just when you're making these, keep in mind their style, maybe the colors in the room that this will display in, and things like that. That way it would really match their decor and they will love it. But after I Mod Podged that on, I went ahead and took my sanding block and I simply sanded the edges and then used my finger to get the excess paper off. Then I took my little knife and I just cut it off, and actually that worked so much better. So I kind of sanded it to give it just the little cut, and then to completely get it off, I used my knife, and this worked out great. After I had nice clean edges, I took that Mod Podge again and decoupaged over the paper. That way it protected it and it kept it down and adhered to that middle part. Next, I decided I was going to distress this just a little bit. Now, if the person you're making it for does not like that distressed look or the rustic look, then you can absolutely skip this step and just keep it nice and clean. But to do this, I used my makeup sponge and Waverly Antique Wax and just lightly brushed over the edges of the middle paper, and then I went around the whole cutting board as well. Once my distressing was done, I put that aside and grabbed some tumbling tower blocks. Now, you're going to need 9 altogether, and what you're going to do is hot glue 3 tumbling tower blocks end to end. Then you're going to make 3 of these little stacks. Now, here you're going to see me only make 2, but you're going to want to make 3 because I realized I was short, so I ended up adding another one. But you're just going to make 3 of these 3-piece stacks. I hope that makes sense. After they're all glued together, I took my ivory chalk paint and painted each one of them with that. Then I took that makeup sponge and the Waverly Antique Wax again, and I just lightly distressed each one of these blocks. Next, I took those tacks that I originally took off the cutting board, and instead of trying to push them in, I just decided I was going to hot glue them down. So I took my wire cutters and I cut off the pointy part of each of the tacks. And then I put them on the middle section of the cutting board so I can line them all up. And then once I figured out where I needed them to go, I went ahead and hot glued them down. Now before I hot glued the bottom ones down, I put one of my stacks of the tumbling tower blocks right at the bottom, so the bottom of the little stack was flush to the bottom of the middle section of the cutting board. I hope that makes sense. We're making a recipe holder, so you want to make sure that the tumbling tower blocks fit underneath your little tacks at the bottom. So once I had that all figured out, I went ahead, like I said, and I hot glued them down. Now in a minute, you're going to see me take one off and move it because they were not even with each other. But first, I took that Waverly Antique Wax and I just dry brushed the tacks. That way it matched the rest of my project because that silver just really did not look good. So I just darkened them up a little bit by using the wax. Next, I'm going to take the tumbling tower blocks and I'm going to hot glue it down at the bottom. Now, here's where I say I have to move one of the tacks because it was not even. And this time I got smart and grabbed my ruler to make sure that they lined up, and then I went ahead and hot glued it back down. But after I do this, that's when I'm going to hot glue the tumbling tower, one of the stacks of the tumbling tower blocks down. Now, I'm gonna hot glue the skinny part down to the cutting board. Sorry about my head and my face in the shot. But like I said, I'm going to hot glue the skinny part down on the cutting board. And then next, I'm going to hot glue the fat part on top of the skinnier part. This is hard to explain. To make a shelf, basically. So if you know, whoever you're going to give this to wants to put a book or a recipe, they can. So as you can see, I did the skinny part of the first tumbling tower block on the cutting board, and then I hot glued the skinny part of the second stack down to the first stack. I hope that makes sense. Now here's where I realized, it's not big enough. So I went ahead and used my hair dryer to melt the glue underneath, and then I pulled it off, and then this is where I'm going to add that third stack of tumbling tower blocks. So this time I hot glued that third stack to where the original stack was glued on the cutting board. So what I wanted to do was make my shelf just a little bit longer so that a book could actually fit in there. Then once I got it glued down, I took that ivory chalk paint again and I painted it, and then I went ahead and distressed it. Then after it was dry, I hot glued my tumbling tower block shelf back on the cutting board at the bottom. Here is where you can see what it should look like. So it's 2 rows of the tumbling tower blocks and then 1 going up. Next, I decided I was going to make a bow to put at the top of the cutting board. So I took this blue turquoise burlap ribbon that I got from the Dollar Tree, and I cut off the ends, and then I cut it in half because I needed it to be a little skinnier. Next, I took some lace, the purple lace, and I cut off 2 strips of that. Then I took this really pretty pink burlap flower ribbon that I actually got from Michael's, and I I cut off 2 pieces, and then I put them in an X form. Next, I forgot, I cut off the ends of these 2 to make them skinnier. So then after that was all cut down, that's when I put them into the X form, and then I put the blue burlap ribbon on top, and then put the lace on top. And then I grabbed some raffia and put that on top as well. Next, I took some twine and I pinched the middles together and then pulled the twine around it really tight and tied it in a knot. And that way it made a bow. But the trick to this is you really have to pull it tight in the middle so that it cinches, and then that way you get your bow. Now, before I hot glued my bow down, I wanted to put a clip on top just in case it was a recipe card. That way they can clip the card onto the little clothing pin. So I had one that was already white, so I just went ahead and distressed it with my Waverly wax so it matched. After that, I took my bow, I hot glued it down, and then I'm going to hot glue the little clothespin underneath it. Now, I made sure to trim up my bow tails, and then I also cut them all at an angle. That way it looks a little cuter. So I kind of felt that the blue ribbon was a little too bright. It kind of just stuck out. So I just took some of my antique Waverly wax and dry brushed over the ribbon. Next, it was time to make a stand. Now, I already had this made from a DIY that I had created and then didn't end up using, but I wanted to show you that I did 3 rows of 4 blocks, and then I hot glued them together, and then I hot glued it to the back. Now, I did stain the blocks as well, and then that way it created a stand. Now, when you put your stand on, you want to lean it backwards a little bit. That way it just naturally sets, and then it makes the perfect little cutting board recipe holder. I absolutely love this. I think it would be a great addition to any kitchen, and I hope that whoever I give it to loves it too. What do you think? For this next DIY, I'm going to be using this box wood sign from the Dollar Tree. Now, this one came from Easter, but they have these all year round. And then I picked up this super cute Mother's Day card. Now, this is the one that's in the plastic, so it was not where all the cards are. It was like in its own little display. But I took it out of the plastic, and then I ripped the middle section out and then cut the card in half, so I was only left with the front of the card. Now, I didn't mention this before, but I did go ahead and sand off the glitter that was on the front of that sign too. Next, they have this little picket fence on there, and it is just held on by little 3D stickers. So I went ahead and popped that off. Now keep it close. We will use that again. But first, I went ahead and gave this entire sign 1 coat of Waverly chalk paint in white. I did the front, although you don't have to paint the entire front because we're going to be covering it, but just around the edges. And then I also painted the sides as well. Next, I went ahead and I hot glued my card in the middle of the sign. Now, the width is not big enough. Like, you can see that there's the white part of the box sticking out, and then the card is actually too long. So what I did was I just figured out where the center was, and then I folded it at the top and folded it at the bottom, and then I cut off the rest. Now, at first I started using my scissors, and then I realized it was much simpler to get that little craft knife again and just use that. Then I believe I also sanded down the top and the bottom just to make it that nice clean cut. Next, I went ahead and hot glued that little picket fence back on. Now, the reason why I took it off was because I had to cut the bottom of the card off. So this time when I glued it, the picket fence was just going to be a little higher up on the card. Next, I decided I was going to distress it. Now, again, if the person you're giving it to does not like that distressed look, you don't have to do this. But I took my Waverly Antique Wax and that makeup sponge and just lightly brushed over the edges. And then I also hit the little picket fence too. And I really love the look that gave. So next I took these little circular puff stickers that came from the Crafter's Square, and I went ahead and put them on all of the sides except for the bottom. Now, I'm not measuring here. I just kind of eyeballed it and just laid them out as evenly as I could in the middle of each of the sides. After they were all down and secure, I went ahead and painted over them with that white Waverly chalk paint. Now, I did not feel the need to hot glue these down because they are stickers, so they were actually pretty strong and they haven't come off yet. So I just went ahead and just used the sticker itself. So then, like I said, I painted over it. Now you want to make sure to paint around the entire circle sticker. That way you don't really see any of the color poking through. And I did this on all three sides. After that dried, I took my Waverly Antique Wax and I brushed it over the top, and the look and the texture that that gave was so neat. I really loved that little detail. Now, this sign came with a hanger on the back, and I chose to leave it on because it could either be hung or it could sit up, but I absolutely love how this came out. It has bright colors, yet it is rustic, and I just feel it is perfect for Mother's Day. What do you think? For my next DIY, I started off with this little wooden plaque that I got in the Crafter's Square. I went ahead and cut off the line, and then I took a piece of scrapbook paper, flipped it over, and then rather than trying to trace around the shape, I just cut off a rectangle to fit the shape. And then I took some Mod Podge and put some of that on the top of this wood plaque. Then I went ahead and just pushed down my scrapbook paper right on top. Once my scrapbook paper was pushed on, I took my sand block and I started to sand the edges down to give it that nice clean cut. Then I realized that I had a little too much excess paper, so I used my scissors to cut around it and then went back with my sanding block and really sanded the edges. That way it gave it that nice clean cut and made it look like the paper is actually part of the wood. You can see I have a little helper off to the side there. She kept stealing all of my stuff. And this is also the case of the missing scissors. Those scissors right there, I have no idea what happened to those after this project. They just up and disappeared. I'll keep you posted on that. Now, to get in the harder to sand places, I took an actual nail file and used that in those spaces, and it really worked out really well. Now, as I was sanding, a little bit of the paper ripped off on the edges, but I wanted to show you because I really love that look. I am such a rustic girl and I love it so much. After all my sanding was done, I took some Mod Podge and just painted over the top to secure my paper. Next, I took my Waverly Antique Wax and of course I stained the edges, so the wood around the paper, and then I hit the top of it too, just to kind of make it all blend in and give it that rustic look. Next, I grabbed one of these crates that I got from the Dollar Tree, and by using a baby wipe, I dipped it into my Waverly Antique Wax and used it as a stain to stain this crate, and I stained the entire thing except for the bottom. You also want to make sure to get into the little holes or the handles on the sides as well. After that crate was dry, I took a little piece of that scrapbook paper again and then just carefully ripped off some of the big pink flowers and the smaller flowers. I thought that this would be really cool because it would look like the paper had ripped on the bottom and it was just so old, so it just kind of deteriorated. So I just ripped off a bunch of the little pieces, and then once I had all of the pieces I wanted, I put a layer of Mod Podge on the crate and then put the flowers on top, and I thought this created such a neat look. Then I went ahead and put some Mod Podge on the top of the flowers. That way it protected them and kept them in place. Once my Mod Podge was dry, I took that makeup sponge with the Waverly Antique Wax and I just kind of brushed it around the edges of the paper. That way you can't see like the ripped white part of the paper, if that makes sense. But I blended it all in and I absolutely love how that came out. And then I did end up adding one more little piece in the corner. So I just did the same thing. I just Mod Podged it on and then I used my Waverly Wax to go ahead and blend that in as well. Now, because these are glued down on a crate, I wanted to create the spaces that would naturally be in the crate again. So I went ahead and I used a couple different methods here, but I used the craft knife at first but that was too sharp because I didn't want to rip the paper off. I just wanted to break it apart so that way you can see the little slice of the crate in there. Then I used a craft stick to go ahead and stick it in there too, and that seemed to work a little better. So as you can see, I keep going back and forth between the knife and the craft stick. You just have to be really careful, go really slow and be patient, and eventually it'll look like what it's supposed to look like. And then I tried to get my little sanding tools in there, but it didn't work. Some sandpaper probably would have been better. I just didn't have any, but I just kind of worked with it. And then I threw some Mod Podge on top of it again just to secure it. Now, to put my sign on the crate, I wanted the sign to be a little higher than the crate. So I took two craft sticks and I started off by staining them first. And then I went ahead and hot glued them down to the very bottom of the sign. And then I put it into the crate, put the craft sticks into the crate and kind of measured them and cut off whatever I needed. And then I hot glued the sticks down into the inside of the crate, which you'll see here in 1 minute. When I glued this down, I made sure that the bottom of the sign was touching the top of the crate. Sorry about my head. Now, I kind of felt like the front was missing something, it was just a little too dull. So I just took some ivory chalk paint and my favorite distressing brush, and I just distressed the top of the crate and the sides. And I really do think that this added some dimension and just kind of brought it to life a little bit more. It's funny what a little bit of paint can do. Next, I took some floral foam and I cut it down so that I had foam in the entire box. And then I just took a variety of different flowers and florals and greenery and just made a little flower arrangement in my little crate. Now, I am not very good at making flower arrangements, to be completely honest, so I just went ahead and sped through this because I really was not going to explain how I did this, but you can kind of just watch because I just I don't know, I just throw them all in there and then fix them, but it's one of those things that every time I look at it, I go adjust something or move something, so you can just see what I'm doing here. But basically, I just put the flowers wherever I saw fit, but I kind of wanted to leave the center of the sign a little plain. So you can see that most of the flowers are kind of to the sides. After I had all my flowers in, I went ahead and hot glued some Spanish moss down to cover the foam. And then I just got some random greenery pieces and I just filled in some spots. Now, like I said, I did try to keep the center of the sign kind of free from the flowers, and in a minute you're gonna see why. After that, I took another clothespin, and like I said, mine were already painted white from another DIY, so I just took some Waverly Antique Wax and I brushed it over, and then I went ahead and I hot glued the clothespin to the top of my sign, and now you have a really cute picture holder floral arrangement, and I think this is so cute. I'm actually going to give this one to my mother-in-law, and that way she can put it in her living room, but I love how this came out. What do you think? For my last DIY gift idea, I thought I would make a gnome. Now, shockingly, this is the first time I've ever made one or attempted this. So it was a lot of fun to make, but it was definitely a learning experience. So the first thing I did was I got an old sock and then I filled it with rice. Now, I found it easier to fill a little vase with rice and then flip the sock over the vase and then just pour it in. And I actually did this twice. So I filled it with 2 vasefuls of rice. And then I went ahead and took an elastic band and I tied it off and cut off the excess on top. Next, I went ahead and added some hot glue to hot glue the little part of the sock up top down. Now you want to be careful, you don't want to touch your elastic band because the hot glue will break it. Next, I took this 2-pack of really cute fuzzy socks that I actually already had, and I decided I wanted the lavender, the lighter purple sock, to be the body. So I just cut off right below the heel and then just stuck my black sock inside of the lavender sock. And then I kind of just formed it to see how I want it to look. Next, I went ahead and took the dark purple polka dot sock, and I'm going to use that as my hat. So I just simply put that over the top of my gnome. Now, I was going to go ahead and work with the hat, but I decided to work on the face first. So next, I took a 20 millimeter bead, and that's what I'm going to use as my nose. So I took some white Waverly chalk paint and I just gave my bead a coat of that. Now, at first I started painting it with my fingers and I'm like, duh, take a skewer and stick it on there. And it was so much easier. So then after it dried, I went ahead and hot glued my hot bead a little under the hat. That way the top of the hat would hide the nose just a little bit. Next, I went ahead and took these pieces of a mop that I had that I used in another DIY, and you can find this mop in the cleaning section where all the brooms and plungers and things are. And I found that it was best to work in sections with this. So what I did was I put a little bead of hot glue, and I did around the nose first because I wanted to get that covered. But I put a little bead of hot glue, and then I put some strands of this mop down, and I made sure that it was completely secure and adhered. And then I went ahead and cut off the bottoms right where the end of the sock was. Next, I kind of went through and just unbraided all of those strands of the mop, and then that way it adds a little bit more hair for the beard. And I did this going around the front half of my gnome. After all my hair was glued down, I took the top part of that hat and I put it over the top pieces of the mop and a little bit over the nose, and then I went ahead and hot glued it down. Next, I gave my little gnome a haircut so his beard was all even at the bottom. Then it was time to work on the hat, so what I did was cut off the bottom where it was attached, and then I took another one of those elastic bands and just kind of went halfway on the hat and rubber banded it together. And then I kind of cut slits at the bottom of the hat. That way it just adds just a little bit of fun. Next, I went ahead and hot glued the hat down to the side, but I made sure that the top of it was bumping up just a little bit. Now, remember what I said earlier? Be careful when you use hot glue with an elastic band because it can break, and mine sure did. So next, I took some of this purple and white twine that I got from the Dollar Tree and used that instead to tie it around, and then I just did the same thing and hot glued it down to the side of my gnome. Next, I took these little garden chalkboard signs and I took my chalk marker and wrote "I Heart Mom." Now, before I glued my sign on, I decided I wanted to make some arms. So I took the other part of the sock that I didn't use, the lavender sock, and I cut off a strip that I felt would be long enough for an arm. So I kind of put it up to the gnome and measured it. Next, I took 2 pieces of floral wire and I put one of the pieces of wire in between the little strip that I had cut and just sandwiched the wire in that little piece of fabric and then hot glued it all together. I did that for 2 of my arms. Next, I went ahead and took my arms and I hot glued them to the side of my gnome underneath the hair on either side. And then I bent the arm so it came around to the front. Next, I took some hot glue and I hot glued my sign in the front of my gnome underneath his little hands. Now, I did cut off the bottom of that stick because it was kind of pointy and I made it just a little bit shorter, but I just made sure to hot glue his hands down on top of the sign. Now, I'm so sorry I lost footage to this last part, but I did end up putting a little bit of flowers in front where the sign is and then around the top of his hat where the elastic is too, and I thought that added the perfect touch to our little Mother's Day gnome. What do you think? I think all of these Mother Day gift ideas came out so cute. And like I said, you can really customize these to match the style and the decor and the colors of the person you're giving it to. I just really wanted to do some bright colors because when I think of Mother's Day, I do think of the bright blues, the pinks, the yellows. I don't know if that's because it's in spring or just because your mom is such a light in your life. But I do love how all of these came out. You're going to have to let me know in the comments which one of these was your absolute favorite and if you're going to try to recreate and gift one of these too. Don't forget, if you do, to post it in my Facebook group, Crafts with Ash, DIY and Decor community group on Facebook because I'd love to see how it turned out. Again, I want to thank you so much for joining me. I hope that you were inspired and got a lot of great ideas. And if you have not done so already, please don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel and then hit that little notification bell so you can get notified anytime I upload a new video. And if you loved what you saw today, be sure to hit that thumbs up button because it does help my channel to grow. Again, thank you for joining me, and until I see you again, I'll craft with you soon. Bye!